1. Introduction. A climate change occurred a few years ago. Average temperatures are higher than previously. The 4 occurrences of the year, -1000 BC, the Roman period, the year 1000 AC, and the current period, lead us to attribute to climatic disturbances a periodicity of 1125 years, since the 3rd millennium BC, but the occurrences for more remote periods are irregular. Temperature peaks are always followed by rapid cooling. 2. The thousand-year-old peaks of global warming. 2.1. The Middle Ages. The West was marked, around the year 1000 BC, by unprecedented economic and demographic development. During this period, there was an extraordinary development in tooling, weaponry and architecture. In northern and central China, too, conditions are becoming more favorable for agriculture. This growth shows a remarkable rise in temperature. A favorable climate has made it possible to exploit areas as unwelcoming as the slopes of the peaks of the Massif Central in France. They were subsequently abandoned and never used again. The 10th century was a fairly warm period, when Lake Constance, on the border between Switzerland and Germany, never froze. This era marks the only colonization of Greenland, literally, the green country, which has never been green again. Many Vikings settled there from 986 AC. But, when the period's climatic disturbance ended, they began to disappear, unable to endure the normal climate of this region. 2.2. The Roman Empire. The Roman era was a golden age. 60 BC, the Rome of Julius Caesar had only one stone temple. The houses were built of wood, on stone foundations to limit rising damp. Rome has also experienced a terrible fire. However, at the beginning of Nero's reign all the temples and theaters were already made of stone. This prosperous period seems to have been characterized by high temperature and high humidity. Pliny the Elder reports that olive trees were cultivated at unusual latitudes. The boom at the start of the Roman imperial era was, most certainly, due to climate change. Unlike a cooling, which would be dramatic, warming increases agricultural productivity, and therefore economic development. This favorable climatic episode was followed by an economic collapse. Before the end of the 2nd century, the terrible epidemic of the Antonine Plague ravaged the West. There was therefore a cooling, favorable to epidemics. 2.3. Antiquity. We must now try to go back in time. Of course, we find the mythical flood of the Bible, but, around 400 BC, Plato, in the Laws and in the Timaeus, mentions cyclical dramas, which would have, periodically, brought humanity back to the deepest destitution. It is about floods, plague epidemics and many other banes that have virtually destroyed mankind. These dramatic events, therefore, seem to have occurred in the period of very low temperatures of the 400 BC. The Great Mycenaean Civilization began around 1600 BC. 400 years later, all Mycenaean palaces and temples were already in ruins. The rich valleys of Laconia and Attica were deserted. These events take place in the cold period of 1200 BC. But prosperity returned around the year 1000 BC. Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem, an imposing edifice, dates from this time. The year 1000 BC also marked the emergence of a new dynasty in China at the other end of the continent, the Zhou. The Great Assyrian Empire reached its peak a little later, around the year 700 BC. The great structures of Stonehenge, in the United Kingdom, were built around 2000 BC. Stone blocks, weighing tens of tons, were dragged from a quarry 40 kilometers away. It took a lot of manpower. The remarkable development of Babylon, from the beginning of the second millennium, is therefore contemporary with Stonehenge. A funeral boat was discovered in 2012 a few kilometers from Giza, in a mastaba of the First Dynasty, and therefore dating from 3150 to 2900 BC, at the start of a period of warming. The construction of the mastabas characterizes an advanced civilization, with a large workforce. The imposing pyramid of Cheops is said to have been built around 2560 BC only. All of these events correspond to global warming that began around 3600 BC. Ötzi's mummy, found on the border between Italy and Austria in 1991, lived in 2596 BC plus or minus 15 years. The temperature was much warmer then than it is today, and even in all known warmings. The mummy has remained frozen continuously to this day, otherwise it would have rotted. 3. The thousand-year-old peaks of population. The population curve of France, since antiquity, highlights successive periods of growth, followed by impressive falls. The French population doubled between -100 BC and 300 AD. It then doubled between 800 and 1200 AD. It doubled again between 1500 and 1900. The falls, in both intervals, correspond to major pandemics. The curves of the world population show the same evolution. In both cases, the surge since the 18th century corresponds to advances in hygiene and then in medicine. For the level of carbon-14 and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased since industrialization. There is similitude between Greenland temperature and carbon-14 content in the atmosphere difference with trend. This content is offset by about 400 years. The trend is a slow irregular decrease of carbon-14 contents. But there is, in the meantime, a similitude between carbon dioxide content in the atmosphere and carbon-14 content difference with trend. The human activities have not the slightest influence on carbon-14, so that the carbon dioxide content should have another explanation. 5. Conclusion. The periodicity of 1125 years is perfectly clear for the temperatures of the Northern Alps and the Greenland glaciers. It deviates notably from it for periods prior to 3500 BC. In Europe, depressions seem to circulate more slowly and more irregularly than before. In particular, there are currently depressions that frequently descend southward along the Atlantic coast instead of eastward. Changes have also been observed in the Middle East. The coincidence of the current climate change with the unusual displacement of the magnetic North Pole and the surprising increase in the speed of the Earth's rotation on itself raises the question of the possibility of a periodic phenomenon linked to astronomy. Disorders of solar activity, by the way also offset by about 400 years, suggest a more general phenomenon within the galaxy.